Ethan wandered the streets of his neighborhood, the sun dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows that danced on the cracked pavement. At 15, he was already hardened by the struggles of life, his stomach growling in protest as the pangs of hunger gnawed at him. He had grown accustomed to the emptiness, a constant companion that followed him like a shadow. Today, however, was worse than usual. The remnants of his meager meals were all but gone, and desperation clawed at him with each step. As he meandered through the alleyways, Ethan overheard snippets of conversations between two men leaning against the wall of a nearby bodega. They spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting around as if someone might overhear their secrets. "That old mansion at the end of Maple Street," one of them said, a hint of excitement in his voice. "They say it's full of treasures, just waiting for someone to take them." "Yeah, but they say it's haunted too," the other replied, shaking his head. "I wouldn't go near that place, man. You never know what you might find." Ethan's heart raced at the mention of the mansion. He had heard the rumors before, tales of valuable artifacts left behind, hidden away in the decaying structure, but he had never considered it seriously until now. The prospect of finding something, anything, that could help him survive this night was too tempting to ignore. With renewed determination, he turned his gaze toward Maple Street, where the mansion loomed like a dark specter against the twilight sky. As he approached the mansion, Ethan couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and trepidation. The old house, with its peeling paint and broken windows, stood as a testament to years of neglect. Vines twisted around its foundation, and the door hung ajar, creaking ominously in the wind. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. If there were treasures inside, he would find them. Ethan stepped through the threshold, the air inside thick with dust and the musty scent of decay. His footsteps echoed in the vast emptiness, the sound swallowed by the darkness that enveloped him. He felt a shiver run down his spine, but the thought of food and perhaps something valuable spurred him on. He moved cautiously, each step deliberate as he navigated through the dimly lit foyer, the remnants of a once grand space now tarnished by time. He rummaged through the scattered debris, broken furniture, shattered picture frames, and remnants of a life long forgotten. His heart raced as he stumbled upon an old ornate vase, its surface cracked but still gleaming with a hint of its former glory. He reached out, fingers brushing against the cool porcelain, envisioning the riches it could fetch. But he quickly shook off the thought. He had come here for survival, not to become a collector of antiques. Lost in thought, Ethan suddenly froze, his instincts kicking in as he heard a faint sound, a soft clinking, almost like chains rattling. Curiosity piqued, he moved toward the source, each step heavier than the last, as if the very air around him was thickening with anticipation. He followed the sound down a narrow hallway, the walls closing in around him, dim light filtering through the grime-covered windows. At the end of the corridor stood a door, its surface worn and weathered, locked tight. The clinking grew louder, and Ethan's heart raced. He glanced around, ensuring he was still alone, and then pulled a hairpin from his pocket. He had picked up a few tricks from watching others break into places, and tonight, he would put them to the test. Kneeling before the door, he inserted the hairpin into the lock, his hands trembling slightly. The cool metal felt foreign in his grip, but he focused on the task at hand. He jimmied it back and forth, frustration creeping in as the lock resisted his efforts. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the thrill of discovery battling against the fear of what lay beyond this door. Come on," he muttered under his breath, sweat beading on his forehead. Just as he was about to give up, he felt a satisfying click. The lock released with a soft sigh, and Ethan pushed the door open. The sight that greeted him made his breath hitch in his throat. The room was dimly lit, shadows clinging to the corners, but what truly caught his attention was the figure in the center. An elderly man lay chained to a bed, his frail body barely visible beneath the tattered sheets. The man's eyes flickered open at the sound of the door, revealing a pair of deep-set, weary orbs that seemed to hold a wealth of sorrow. "Who's there?" the old man croaked, his voice raspy and weak. Ethan's heart raced, a jolt of fear coursing through him. I'm just looking for something," he stammered, instinctively taking a step back. The reality of the situation hit him harder than the chill in the air. He had come here to steal, but now he found himself confronted with a grim scene that stirred something deep within him. "Looking for something, are you?" the old man replied, his voice tinged with a mixture of bitterness and resignation. "You won't find what you're looking for here, boy." Ethan hesitated, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. He had expected to find treasures, not a man in chains. "What happened to you?" he asked, unable to suppress his curiosity. The old man's gaze softened, and for a moment, the weariness in his eyes seemed to lift. My name is Henry, he said slowly, each word heavy with meaning. I was once a man of wealth and power. But betrayal is a cruel fate. Ethan felt a pang of empathy, something he hadn't anticipated. Betrayal? By who? He pressed, stepping closer, intrigued by the story that began to unfold. Henry sighed, a deep, shuddering breath that spoke of pain and loss. A trusted partner. Someone I called a friend. He sought revenge for a wrong that was never meant to be. And now, here I remain, a prisoner in my own home. Ethan's heart ached at the old man's words, the horror of his situation sinking in. He had never considered the possibility of compassion in a place like this. The chains that bound Henry seemed to echo the chains of his own life, shackled by hunger and desperation. Ethan's initial instincts to flee faded into the background, replaced by a flicker of determination. Is there a way to help you? He found himself asking, the question spilling from his lips before he could think better of it. Henry's eyes widened slightly, a glimmer of hope igniting in their depths. Help me? He echoed, disbelief coloring his tone. Why would a boy like you care about an old man like me? Because I know what it's like to feel powerless, Ethan replied, surprising even himself with the honesty of his words. And I can't just leave you here. The old man studied him for a long moment, weighing the sincerity in Ethan's gaze. If you truly wish to help, you must find a way to break these chains, he said, his voice steadying. But be warned, there are dangers in this house, far beyond what you see. Ethan nodded, a surge of resolve washing over him. He would not turn back now. He would help Henry escape this nightmare, and in doing so, perhaps find a way to free himself from the chains that bound his own existence. With a deep breath, he set his sights on the task ahead, determined to unravel the darkness that enveloped both their lives. Ethan's heart raced as he pushed the heavy door open, the rusted hinges groaning as if protesting the intrusion. The dim light from the single grimy window barely illuminated the room, casting long shadows that danced along the walls. His breath caught in his throat as he took in the sight before him. There, chained to a bed, was an old man, frail, with a tangled white beard and sunken cheeks. His eyes, however, held a flicker of life, a sharp contrast to the desolation surrounding him. Who are you? The old man croaked, his voice thick with disuse, yet laced with an intensity that made Ethan hesitate. I'm Ethan, he stammered, caught off guard. The boy had expected to find nothing but treasure, not a living soul. What happened to you? Henry, the old man, shifted slightly, the chains rattling softly. I've been waiting for someone to hear my story. They never come, you know. Just the darkness and the silence. His eyes narrowed as he studied Ethan. But you're not here for my story. You're here to take something, aren't you? Ethan felt a wave of guilt wash over him. He had come into this mansion with the intent to steal, driven by hunger and desperation. Now, standing before Henry, his purpose felt insignificant. I was going to take something, but his voice trailed off, uncertain. But now you see me. You see what's left of a man who once had everything. Henry's gaze softened, and he seemed to wrestle with his own memories. I was once a businessman, a partner in a thriving enterprise. I had wealth, respect, and then I was betrayed. What do you mean? Ethan asked, curiosity creeping in, battling the urge to flee. Who betrayed you? Henry sighed deeply, the weight of years pressing down on him. A man named Victor? He was my closest friend, a brother in every sense of the word. But greed has a way of warping the heart. When the company began to falter, he turned on me. Accused me of embezzlement, of plotting against him. I was arrested, and upon my release he took me here, not to put me in prison, but to chain me like a dog. Ethan stepped closer, drawn in by the old man's story. Why didn't you go to the police? Because no one would believe me. Victor had connections, power. He painted me as a villain, and I became nothing more than a ghost in his game. Henry's voice trembled with emotion. I've been here for years, Ethan. The world moved on without me. I lost everything, my family, my dignity. And now, I wait for my end. The boy's heart ached for Henry, a man who had endured so much suffering. But you're still alive. Maybe there's a way to escape. Henry chuckled softly, a sound tinged with bitterness. Escape? The chains are heavy, and the door is locked. Victor's men patrol this place. I am a prisoner, and I have grown too weak to fight. No, you don't have to be a prisoner, Ethan blurted out, feeling an unexpected surge of determination. I can help you. Help me." Henry raised an eyebrow, skepticism mingling with a flicker of hope in his eyes. "What can a boy like you do?" "I can pick locks. I got in here, didn't I?" Ethan replied, his chest swelling with a newfound resolve. "If I can get you free, we can escape together." Henry studied Ethan for a long moment, weighing the boy's words against the bleakness of his own reality. "You're brave, Ethan. But bravery can be foolish. If you attempt to free me and fail, it will cost you your life." Ethan swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the old man's gaze. "I'm already living a life that feels like nothing. What's the worst that can happen? I'd rather die trying to help you than live in fear." The old man's expression softened, and for the first time, a genuine smile creased his worn face. "You have spirit, boy. It reminds me of my younger days." "Very well. If you truly wish to help me, I will share what I know. But you must be cautious." "I will," Ethan promised, his determination solidifying. "Tell me what I need to do." Henry glanced around the dim room, his voice dropping to a whisper. "There's a rusty pipe over there, just out of reach. If you can fetch it, we can use it to break these chains. The lock is old and worn. With enough pressure, it might yield." Ethan nodded and rushed to the corner of the room where the pipe lay, its surface covered in dust and grime. He picked it up, feeling its weight in his hands, and returned to Henry, who was watching him with a mix of awe and disbelief. "Are you sure this will work?" Ethan asked, his heart pounding. "Nothing is certain, but it's our best chance," Henry replied, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Now, let's get to work." Ethan knelt beside the bed, positioning the pipe against the heavy chains that bound Henry's wrists. With all his strength, he pushed down as hard as he could, sweat trickling down his brow. The metal groaned under the pressure, but it wouldn't budge. "Harder, Ethan? Use your weight," Henry urged, his eyes alight with a mix of fear and hope. Taking a deep breath, Ethan shifted his position and pushed down with all his might. The chains rattled violently, and for a moment, he feared they might break. Suddenly, with a loud snap, the chain gave way, and Henry's wrist was free. "Yes, you did it," Henry exclaimed, a glimmer of triumph in his eyes that Ethan had never seen before. But the victory was short-lived. Just then, the sound of footsteps echoed in the distance, heavy and deliberate. Ethan's heart sank as he turned to Henry, panic flooding his senses. "We need to hurry." Henry quickly shifted his attention to the remaining chain, his hands moving with newfound urgency. "We have no time to lose. They mustn't find us here." Ethan glanced nervously toward the door, the footsteps growing louder. "What if they come in? What do we do?" "Just keep working. We're almost there," Henry encouraged, determination etched across his face. Ethan focused on the task at hand, his hands shaking as he worked to free Henry completely. The footsteps were now unmistakably close, the dread coiling in his stomach like a serpent ready to strike. With a final heave, the last of the chains fell away, and Henry sat up, rubbing his sore wrists. "I'm free. Now we must move." But as he spoke, the door creaked open, revealing a dark figure silhouetted against the light. It was Victor, his expression a mix of surprise and rage. "Henry," he snarled, his voice dripping with malice. "What have you done?" Ethan's heart raced as he and Henry locked eyes, realizing the precariousness of their situation. There was no turning back now. "Run!" Henry shouted, propelling himself off the bed and towards the door. But Victor was already moving, his intentions clear. Ethan felt the weight of the moment crashing down around him, the choices he had made leading to this crucial juncture. He had come in search of a meal, but now he was embroiled in a battle for freedom, not just for himself, but for the man who had become an unlikely ally in the darkest of circumstances. As the confrontation loomed, the air thick with tension, Ethan knew that their lives were about to change forever. Ethan stood in the dimly lit room, the musty air heavy with the scent of decay and neglect. He could hardly believe what he had stumbled upon. The frail old man Henry, chained to the bed, had captivated him in a way he hadn't anticipated. The initial thrill of theft was replaced with a growing sense of responsibility. As he gazed at Henry's weary face, Ethan felt an overwhelming urge to help. "What's your name, boy?" Henry asked, his voice raspy and weak. "Ethan," he replied, his heart racing. "I've never met anyone like you before." Henry chuckled softly, a sound that echoed with a mixture of sadness and wisdom. "I hope that's not a bad thing. Life has a way of chaining us in more ways than one." Ethan shifted uneasily, recalling the grim stories he had heard about the mansion. "Why are you here? Who did this to you?" Henry's expression darkened, and he looked away, as if the memories were too painful to face. "It's a long story, but it begins with trust. Trust that was betrayed by someone I thought was a friend." Ethan leaned in closer, the flickering light casting shadows on the walls. "I want to hear it," he insisted. With a weary sigh, Henry began to recount the tale of his former partner, Victor. "We were young and ambitious. Together, we built a successful business, but greed has a way of corrupting the best of intentions. I made a mistake, a grave one, and Victor, he couldn't let it go." "What did you do?" Ethan pressed, captivated by the narrative unfolding before him. "I took a chance on a deal that went sour. I thought I could salvage it, but it cost us everything. Victor blamed me for our downfall, and instead of confronting me like a man, he chose this path, to imprison me, to make me suffer for my mistakes." As Henry spoke, Ethan could see the pain etched in his features, the burden of regret weighing heavily on him. "But you're still here," Ethan said softly. "You're still alive. There must be a way to escape." Henry's eyes brightened momentarily, ignited by a flicker of hope. "Yes, perhaps there is. But I can't do it alone. I need your help, Ethan. You're young and resourceful. If we work together, we might stand a chance." Ethan's heart raced at the prospect. "What do you need me to do?" "I need you to break these chains," Henry explained, gesturing weakly toward the rusty restraints that bound him. "They're old, but I've seen them weaken over time. If we can find something strong enough to pry them open." Ethan glanced around the dimly lit room and spotted a rusted pipe near the far wall. "I saw something outside earlier," he said, his voice filled with determination. "I can get it." "Be careful, Ethan," Henry cautioned. "If Victor finds you, I'll be quick," Ethan promised, already moving toward the door. He slipped out of the room, the eerie silence of the mansion amplifying every creak of the floorboards beneath his feet. The hallway was shrouded in darkness, shadows dancing along the walls as the remnants of a once grand home whispered stories of its past. Ethan's pulse quickened as he approached the pipe, its surface cold and grimy. He tugged at it, feeling a rush of adrenaline as it came loose with a satisfying clank. Clutching the pipe tightly, he hurried back to Henry's side. "Here," he said, panting slightly. "I found it." Henry's eyes widened, a mixture of hope and urgency flashing across his face. "Good. Now, let's get to work." Together, they positioned the pipe against the chain, and Ethan pressed down with all his weight. The metal groaned against the strain, but the chain held firm. "It's not budging," he muttered, frustration bubbling inside him. "Keep trying," Henry urged. "We have to believe it will work." Ethan gritted his teeth and pushed harder, sweat beading on his forehead. With each effort, the chains rattled, but the restraint remained stubbornly intact. Come on," he whispered, his breath coming in quick bursts. Just when he thought they might be doomed to fail, there was a sharp crack, and the chain shuddered. "I felt that?" Ethan exclaimed, exhilaration surging through him. "Again." Henry encouraged, his voice steady despite the circumstances. Ethan redoubled his efforts, the pipe straining against the chain one more time. With a final desperate push, the chain broke free, clattering to the floor. "Yes!" Ethan shouted, adrenaline surging through him. Henry pulled his hands away from the remnants of the chains, rubbing his wrists. "You did it, Ethan. You actually did it." But the moment of triumph was short-lived. The sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway, sending a chill down Ethan's spine. "Someone's coming," he hissed, his heart racing. Henry's expression shifted from joy to panic. "We need to hide. Quickly." Without a moment's hesitation, they scrambled to find a place to conceal themselves. The shadows of the room offered little refuge, but Ethan spotted a large, tattered curtain. "Under here," he urged, pulling Henry beneath the heavy fabric just as the door creaked open. They pressed themselves against the cold wooden floor, hearts pounding in unison as the footsteps drew nearer. Ethan held his breath, the world narrowing down to the sound of their own racing hearts. Victor entered the room, his presence dominating the space. "What a mess," he muttered, surveying the scene with a scowl. "You can't even keep a simple chain intact, can you, old man?" Ethan felt Henry tense beside him, restrained by fear and anger. Victor continued his taunts, pacing back and forth. "You'll pay for your incompetence. How long do you think I'll allow you to exist in my home, chained or not?" Ethan exchanged a terrified glance with Henry. They were trapped with nowhere to run. "You think you can escape?" Victor sneered, glancing toward the bed. "You're still mine, Henry. I'll always have a hold on you." As Victor turned his back, Ethan felt a surge of determination. They had worked too hard to get this far, and he refused to let fear dictate their fate. "Ethan," Henry whispered, his voice barely audible. "We have to be smart. We can't let him catch us." The tension in the room was palpable as Victor moved closer to the bed, rummaging through a drawer. Ethan's heart raced, and he felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. They needed to act, and fast. Ethan squeezed the pipe tightly, his mind racing. "On the count of 3, we make a break for it," he whispered urgently. Henry nodded, steeling himself for what lay ahead. 1, 2, but just as Ethan prepared to shout 3, a loud crash echoed through the mansion, jolting them both. What was that? Victor turned sharply, his expression shifting from annoyance to alarm. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he felt the moment slipping away. They had to escape before it was too late. "Now!" he shouted, pulling Henry to his feet as they bolted for the door. The air was thick with tension as they raced through the darkened halls, the sound of Victor's furious shouts echoing behind them. Ethan's mind raced. They had to find a way out before the chains of fate tightened around them once more. Ethan's heart raced as he and Henry crouched beneath the bed, the dust swirling in the dim light like the ghosts of the mansion itself. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway, each thud resonating in Ethan's chest as he held his breath. He could feel the damp chill of fear creeping up his spine, and he glanced sideways at Henry, who met his gaze with a steely resolve despite his frail appearance. The door creaked open, and a tall, imposing figure stepped into the room. A man Ethan recognized from Henry's stories. Victor, the former partner turned malevolent captor, had a predatory glint in his eyes. He was dressed in a dark leather jacket, his hair slicked back, and he radiated an aura of danger that made Ethan's skin crawl. "Still alive, old man?" Victor sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. He stepped closer to the bed, casting a shadow over Henry. "I thought I'd left you to rot long ago." Ethan felt the urge to bolt, to flee from this nightmare, but he remained frozen, his instincts screaming for him to stay hidden. He could hear Henry's labored breathing, a stark reminder of the old man's vulnerability. "Why do you keep coming back?" Henry's voice, though weak, was laced with defiance. "You think this is victory? You think chaining me like an animal gives you power?" Victor chuckled, a low, menacing sound that echoed in the confines of the room. "Power? Oh, Henry, this isn't about power. It's about revenge. You betrayed me, and now I will make sure you suffer for it. Every breath you take is a reminder of your failure." Ethan clenched his fists, anger surging within him. He hated the way Victor spoke, like Henry was nothing more than a plaything, a toy to be tormented. Yet, he knew they had to remain silent, to bide their time. "Do you think anyone cares about you anymore?" Victor continued, pacing the room with an air of superiority. "You were once a man of influence, but look at you now, broken and chained. You're nothing but a shadow of your former self. And soon, you'll be just a memory." Henry's eyes blazed with a fire that Ethan hadn't seen before. "You underestimate me, Victor. You may think you've won, but one day, this will all come back to haunt you." Victor paused, smirking as he leaned in closer, his face inches from Henry's. "Haunt me? You're just a ghost, old man. A relic of a past that no longer matters." Ethan felt the weight of despair pressing down on him. The realization that they were trapped, that Victor relished this torment, sent shivers through him. But he couldn't allow himself to succumb to hopelessness. With a final disdainful glance at Henry, Victor turned away, his footsteps echoing as he exited the room, leaving the door ajar. Ethan exhaled slowly, the tension in his body releasing as he turned to Henry. "Now's our chance," Ethan whispered urgently. "We can't waste any more time." Henry nodded, his expression shifting from defeat to determination. "We need to be quiet, Ethan. Victor's men are likely patrolling the mansion, and they won't hesitate to kill if they find us." Ethan crawled out from beneath the bed, his heart pounding in his chest. He quickly surveyed the room, searching for any potential weapons or tools that could aid their escape. The room was sparse, just the bed, a small table with a lamp that flickered ominously, and a window sealed shut with grime and dust. "We need to get those chains off you," he said, kneeling beside Henry. "Do you think you can manage to stand?" "I'll try," Henry replied, grit in his voice. He struggled to sit up, wincing as he moved. Ethan quickly grabbed the rusty pipe they had found earlier, feeling its weight in his hands. "Okay, let's see if this works," Ethan said, positioning himself next to Henry. He carefully examined the chains, looking for the weakest link. "Just be careful, Ethan. If you break the chain and it makes too much noise—" "I know," Ethan interrupted, swallowing hard. "I'll be quick." He struck the chain with the pipe, a harsh metallic clank reverberating in the silence. He winced, fearing that any sound might attract unwanted attention. He repeated the process, each strike echoing like thunder in the stillness of the room. Finally, with one last blow, the chain snapped, and Henry let out a breath of relief. "I'm free," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. Ethan smiled, feeling a rush of triumph. "Let's get you out of here." But before they could formulate a plan, a noise from outside the room sent them both into a frenzy of panic. "Did you hear that?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Henry nodded, eyes wide with fear. "We need to hide. If it's one of Victor's men." They quickly ducked back beneath the bed, hearts racing as they waited in silence. The footsteps grew louder, and Ethan's mind raced with possibilities. What if they were caught? What if Victor returned? The door creaked open once more, and a figure stepped inside, scanning the room. Ethan held his breath, praying they wouldn't be discovered. "Victor wants to know if the old man is still breathing," the man grunted, his voice rough and dismissive. "If he's dead, we're all in trouble." Ethan's stomach dropped. They were on borrowed time. "Let's check," the man continued, moving closer to the bed. Ethan could see the glint of a knife at the man's side, and his heart raced. "Please no," Ethan whispered under his breath, squeezing Henry's hand tightly. The man knelt beside the bed, peering into the darkness. "What's the matter, old man? You hiding something?" Ethan's mind raced. He had to think of something, anything, to distract the man. "Hey!" he shouted suddenly, surprising even himself. "Over here." The man whipped around, alarmed. "What the?" Ethan seized the moment, pushing himself out from under the bed and lunging at the man. He knocked the knife away, sending it clattering across the floor. "What the hell?" the man shouted, scrambling back. In that instant, Henry took advantage of the chaos, struggling to rise to his feet. "Ethan, get out of here." But Ethan shook his head, feeling a surge of bravery. "No, we can't leave you." The man lunged at Ethan, but with a quick sidestep, Ethan avoided the attack. He felt adrenaline pumping through his veins, a desperate urge to protect Henry. Suddenly, the door burst open again, and Victor's shadow loomed in the entrance. "What's going on in here?" he barked, his voice cold and commanding. Ethan's heart sank as he realized they were outnumbered and outmatched. "Get rid of him," Victor ordered, his eyes narrowed in anger. The man scrambled to his feet, lunging at Ethan once again. Panic surged within him as he realized how easily this could end. "Henry, run!" Ethan shouted, but before Henry could react, Victor stepped forward, blocking the way. "Now you've really done it, boy," Victor sneered, his voice low and menacing. "You should have stayed hidden." Ethan stood his ground, fists clenched. "I'm not afraid of you." Victor chuckled darkly, a sound that sent chills down Ethan's spine. "You should be." As tension filled the air, Ethan felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. The old man's freedom and his own survival hinged on what would happen next, and Ethan couldn't allow fear to dictate his actions. But he also knew they needed a plan, and fast. Victor's men were closing in, and the walls of the mansion felt like they were closing in around them. Ethan's eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape route, knowing that time was running out. As Ethan and Henry navigated the dimly lit corridors of the mansion, the atmosphere was thick with tension and urgency. The air was stale, carrying the faint scent of mildew and dust, remnants of a long-forgotten past. Each creaking floorboard beneath their feet seemed to echo the weight of their desperation. They moved cautiously, hearts racing, fully aware that danger lurked just out of sight. "Do you remember the first time you felt truly alive?" Henry's voice broke the silence, its frail texture contrasting with the gravity of their situation. Ethan glanced at him, surprised by the unexpected question. "I don't know," Ethan replied, his brow furrowed. "Maybe when I was playing soccer with my friends in the park. It felt like freedom." Henry smiled softly, the shadows of his past flickering in his eyes. "I used to be a different man, you know. I was a businessman, successful and respected. I had everything, a family, a home, a future. but it all slipped away because of one betrayal. Ethan felt a pang of empathy. "What happened?" he asked, curiosity getting the better of him. Henry paused, taking a deep breath. "My partner, Victor, was someone I trusted deeply. We built our empire together, but greed can twist even the noblest of hearts. When I discovered he was embezzling funds, I confronted him. Instead of coming clean, he turned on me. He painted me as the villain, and I lost everything." Ethan's heart ached for Henry. The story resonated with him, echoing the struggles of his own life. "So he did this to you because of that?" he asked, gesturing around them, the chains of Henry's past now visible in the shackles that held him captive. "Yes," Henry replied, his voice lowering. "He wanted revenge. He wanted to make me suffer for exposing his treachery." As they walked, Ethan felt a sense of camaraderie forming between them. Two souls, bound by pain and desperation, each seeking a way out of their own hell. He couldn't help but admire Henry's resilience. Despite his frail appearance, there was a fire in his eyes that fueled Ethan's determination to help him. "Let's find a way out of here," Ethan said, his voice firm. "You deserve to be free." "Thank you, Ethan. You don't know what that means to me," Henry replied, a hint of gratitude softening the lines of his face. They continued down a narrow hallway, the flickering light from a cracked overhead bulb casting eerie shadows. The mansion loomed around them, filled with secrets and memories long forgotten. Each step forward felt like a step into the unknown, but Ethan's resolve only grew stronger. He would not let fear dictate their fate. Finally, they arrived at a large window at the end of the corridor. It was framed with rotting wood and layers of grime, but it offered a glimmer of hope. Ethan rushed to it, his heart racing with anticipation. But as he tried to lift the window, he found it sealed shut. "Damn it," he muttered, pushing against it with all his might. "It won't budge." Henry joined him, his frail hands pressing against the wooden frame. "We need to find something to break it open. There must be a tool around here." Just then, a faint sound reached their ears, a voice, unmistakably Victor's, drifting through the hall. Ethan's heart sank as he recognized the tone, cold and calculating, as if he were plotting their demise. "Soon, Henry, very soon, you will understand the depths of my power," Victor's voice echoed ominously. "Your little friend won't save you this time. I've made arrangements to ensure that you both pay for your betrayal." Ethan's breath hitched in his throat. They had to act fast. "We can't let him find us here," he whispered urgently. "We need to break this window now." As panic surged through him, Ethan's eyes darted around the room, searching for anything that could help. His gaze landed on a rusty fire axe mounted on the wall, its blade dulled by age but still formidable. Without a second thought, he dashed towards it and yanked it free from its resting place. "Ethan, be careful," Henry warned, his voice trembling slightly. "We don't want to make too much noise." "I know," Ethan replied, gripping the axe tightly. "But we have to take the chance. If we don't get out of here now, we might not get another opportunity." He positioned himself in front of the window, raising the axe high above his head. The weight of the metal felt reassuring in his hands, a weapon against their impending doom. "On the count of 3, he said, glancing back at Henry, who nodded resolutely. 1, 2, 3. With all his strength, he swung the axe down against the glass. The sound of shattering glass echoed like thunder in the silent mansion. Henry flinched, but Ethan felt a rush of adrenaline as he broke through the barrier that had held them captive. "Quick, climb through," he urged, his heart pounding. Henry moved cautiously, his frail body trembling with effort as he stepped closer to the broken window. "I'm not as spry as I used to be, Ethan," he said, a hint of humor in his voice despite the gravity of the situation. "Take your time," Ethan replied, his eyes scanning the hallway for any sign of Victor. "Just be careful." As Henry began to climb through the jagged opening, Ethan felt a surge of determination. This was their moment, the moment to reclaim their lives. He glanced back at the darkness of the mansion, a place filled with pain and betrayal, and made a silent vow to never let fear control him again. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from the other end of the corridor, sending a jolt of terror through Ethan's body. "Hurry," he shouted, panic rising in his throat. "He's coming." With a final push, Henry managed to wriggle through the window, landing awkwardly on the ground outside. Ethan followed closely behind, adrenaline coursing through his veins as he squeezed through the shattered glass. As they tumbled into the cool night air, Ethan looked back at the mansion, its dark silhouette looming ominously against the moonlit sky. Their escape had only just begun, But with each step they took away from the chains of the past, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope, a hope that maybe, just maybe, they could break free from the darkness that had haunted them for so long. Ethan's heart raced as he swung the fire axe against the window, the sound of shattering glass echoing through the empty mansion. The cool night air rushed in, but the thrill of the moment was abruptly punctured by the heavy footfalls of Victor approaching. Panic surged through Ethan's veins. They were so close to freedom, yet so perilously close to being caught. "Quick, Ethan. We need to get out," Henry urged, his frail voice a mixture of desperation and determination. The old man's eyes were wide, reflecting both fear and a glimmer of hope. They had spent too long in the suffocating room, and now the moment of escape was slipping through their fingers. Ethan glanced at Henry, the man who had become an unlikely ally in his quest for survival. "I can't believe we're doing this," he muttered, the weight of his circumstances crashing down around him. He swung the axe again, cutting through the last remnants of the window's frame. Shards fell to the floor, and the path to freedom lay before them, the night beckoning. "Go, go," Henry urged, his voice now a sharp whisper. Ethan climbed through the jagged opening first, his heart pounding in his chest. He landed outside on the overgrown lawn, the cool grass a welcome relief against his skin. He turned to help Henry, but just then, a loud crash resonated from inside the mansion. Victor had entered the room. "Where are you hiding, old man?" Victor's voice boomed, filled with malice. Ethan's stomach twisted with fear. He could hear Victor's footsteps growing closer, the heavy thud of his boots sending a chill down his spine. "Ethan," Henry called, his voice trembling with urgency. "We can't let him catch us." "I know," Ethan replied, his mind racing. They had to keep moving. But before he could decide their next move, he heard Victor's voice again, laced with twisted satisfaction. "You think you can escape me? You've been my prisoner for far too long, and now you're going to pay for trying to flee." Ethan's instincts kicked in. "We need to create a distraction," he whispered to Henry, who was now clambering through the window. "Can you walk?" Henry nodded, determination etched on his weathered face. "I can manage. Just give me a moment." As he finally made his way outside, the two of them crouched low, hiding behind the thick bushes that lined the property. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the mansion, followed by Victor's furious shouting. "You can't hide from me. I will find you." Ethan's heart raced. He had never felt so alive or so terrified. The world outside was dark, but his mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. The old man had been a prisoner, but now they were both fugitives, united by their shared fight for freedom. "Henry," Ethan whispered, trying to keep his voice steady. "What do we do next?" But before Henry could respond, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, his hand trembling slightly. "I have something that might change the odds, Ethan," he said, revealing a sleek black gun, its metal gleaming even in the sparse moonlight. Ethan's eyes widened. "You had a gun this whole time?" Henry nodded solemnly. "I stashed it away years ago. I never thought I would need it again. But now," his voice trailed off as he looked toward the mansion, where Victor was still searching for them. "Now we can turn the tables," Ethan said, a newfound courage swelling within him. "Let's confront him." As they crouched behind the bushes, readying themselves for the confrontation, Ethan felt a rush of adrenaline course through him. This was their moment to reclaim their lives, to stand against the man who had brought so much pain. "On my count," Henry said, steadying his breathing. 1, 2, 3. They sprang from their hiding place, charging toward the mansion. Ethan felt alive, his fear replaced by a fierce determination. They burst through the door, startling Victor, who was rummaging through the room searching for them. "What the?" Victor exclaimed, turning just in time to see Henry raise the gun, his hands steady despite the years of abuse he had suffered. "Victor!" Henry shouted, his voice booming with authority. "This ends now." Victor's expression shifted from surprise to rage. "You think you can threaten me? You're nothing but an old man. You're weak." Henry's eyes darkened, and with a calmness that startled Ethan, he replied, "Weakness does not define a man. It's his actions that do." With that, he pulled the trigger, the gun firing a warning shot that ricocheted off the wall, sending shards of plaster flying. Victor's bravado faltered, and for a moment, fear flickered in his eyes. "You're insane. You think this will end well for you?" "It ends now, Victor," Ethan said, stepping beside Henry, emboldened by the old man's courage. "You've tormented him for too long, and now it's your turn to face justice." Victor's bravado crumbled as he backed away, his eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape. "You're making a mistake. You don't know who you're dealing with." "Oh, I know exactly who you are," Ethan replied, anger boiling within him. "You're a coward who hides behind chains and threats." Victor's hands trembled, the facade of control slipping away. "You think the police will believe you? You think they'll care about an old man and a street rat?" Just then, the sound of sirens pierced the air, growing louder as they approached. Ethan's heart sank but then lifted again with a surge of hope. "I already called them," he said, his voice steady. "They'll be here any moment." Victor's face paled as realization dawned on him. "You little brat. You think this is over? You have no idea what I'm capable of." Before Ethan could respond, Victor turned and bolted for the exit. But Henry was quick, aiming the gun with newfound resolve. "Stop right there," he shouted, his voice echoing through the mansion. Victor hesitated, glancing back, but the sirens were getting closer. With a final surge of desperation, he lunged for the door, but it swung open just as he reached it. Police officers flooded into the room, their uniforms stark against the dilapidated surroundings. "Get down on the ground," one of the officers commanded, brandishing his weapon. Victor froze, his bravado utterly shattered. Ethan and Henry stepped back, allowing the officers to take control. As they handcuffed Victor and led him away, Ethan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The nightmare was finally over. "Ethan." Henry's voice was softer, filled with gratitude. "You did well, boy. You showed a bravery I never expected." Ethan smiled, realizing the bond they had forged in those harrowing moments. "I couldn't have done it without you, Henry. You taught me that even in darkness, there's a chance for light." With Victor in custody, the officers turned to Ethan and Henry, their expressions shifting from suspicion to understanding. "Are you both okay?" one of them asked, concern etched on his face. "Yes," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "We're free now." As the night wore on, Ethan and Henry found themselves standing outside the mansion, the first light of dawn breaking on the horizon. A police car pulled up, and an officer stepped out, looking at Ethan with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Ethan, right?" the officer said, his tone gentle. "I heard you were the one who tipped us off. You did good work tonight." "Thanks," Ethan replied, a warmth spreading through him. He felt a sense of accomplishment, finally shedding the weight of his troubled past. Henry placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, his grip firm and reassuring. "You have a future ahead of you, Ethan. Don't waste it." Ethan nodded, determination filling his heart. With Henry at his side, he knew they could face whatever came next. The chains of the past had been shattered, and before them lay a road of hope, ready to be forged anew.